Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, The Drive, had been long, dull, and exhausting in a way I had never really understood until that day. It always seemed strange to me how sitting in a car for 6 hours could make me feel more drained than standing on my feet for an 8-hour shift. At least at work, my body had something to do. I could move around, talk to people, shift my weight, stretch my legs, and feel like time was passing normally. But in a car, you are trapped in one position, staring straight ahead, holding the wheel, watching the road unfold mile after mile. There is something about being stuck like that, with the same view and the same pressure in your shoulders that starts to feel heavy after a while. It settles over you slowly, like a weighted blanket, until every minute feels harder than the one before it. I stopped more than I needed to. I told myself it was for bathroom breaks, coffee, snacks, and gas, but really I think I just wanted excuses to get out of the car. At every stop, I stood beside my car longer than necessary, stretching my back and looking out across the land. At first, there were open fields and long stretches of flat road. Then, as I got closer to the town, the fields gave way to thicker trees. Each rest stop seemed emptier than the last. There were fewer cars, fewer people, and more dark shapes of forest pressing close to the road. By the time evening came, the whole world around me felt narrower, quieter, and less welcoming. When I finally pulled into the driveway, it was already dark outside, and my mood was terrible. I hated arriving anywhere in the dark. Everything looked unfamiliar and wrong at night, especially when you were supposed to feel at home. This was supposed to be the place I would live soon. My first time seeing the area should have been a chance to get comfortable, to look around, to imagine my new life there. Instead, I had driven through winding neighborhoods in blackness, trying to follow directions while the trees blocked out the sky and every turn looked the same. The whole process of moving was already stressful enough, and arriving like that made me feel even more disoriented. I regretted leaving late. I regretted making so many stops. I regretted not planning better. I shut my car door harder than I meant to and slung my overnight bag over my shoulder. Just then, the porch light came on. A soft yellow glow spread out from under the wooden awning, making the front of the house look warm and peaceful. Before I could even take another step, the front door cracked open, and a small dog squeezed through the gap and came running toward me. Cosmo. An older woman called from the porch. "Cosmo, come back here." The dog, a border collie, bounded up to me with all the energy in the world. He jumped against my legs, then leapt up again, his paws scraping the front of my sweatshirt. I laughed despite myself, and some of my bad mood began to melt away. "Hi, Cosmo," I mumbled, crouching down to pet him and ruffle his ears. I held gently onto his collar in case he decided to run. "Hi, puppy. Are you that friendly?" "I'm so sorry," the woman called as she hurried down the driveway. She reached us and took his collar from my hand, guiding him back toward the house. He hardly ever gets to meet new people. This was Joan, my mother's old friend. I had not known exactly what to expect. I had only ever seen old pictures of her. In some of them, she and my mom were young women sitting together in a college dorm room. In others, Joan was holding me as a baby, smiling like she was the happiest person in the world. Standing there in the glow from the porch light, I could not make out much detail at first. I saw pale blue pajama pants, a thick knit sweater, and light brown hair with plenty of gray streaks in it. Her hair was tied up messily at the back of her head with a ribbon, and I watched it bob as I followed her up the steps. As soon as we were inside and the door was safely shut behind us, she released Cosmo and opened her arms. I set my bag down and hugged her. She smelled strongly of lavender and something earthy, like old tea leaves or damp garden soil. Her frizzy hair brushed against my ear. "I'm so glad you're here," Joan said, pulling back and clasping her hands in front of her. She beamed at me. "Oh, look at you. I haven't seen you since you were a little baby." Now that we were inside, I got a better look at her. She had soft wrinkles around her eyes, and her eyes were lighter than I expected from the photos. One of them seemed a little droopier than the other. I could not remember if my mother had once said Joan had a stroke, or maybe Bell's palsy. Either way, I felt bad for noticing. Age had also made her smaller than she looked in old pictures. Back in college, she had looked fuller and stronger. Now she seemed thin, but her cheeks were flushed with warmth, and her smile made her feel kind. I smiled back and let her take my hands in hers. Older women always seem to like doing that, holding your hands as if they could understand your whole life through your fingers. "I know," I said. "I'm so glad you got here safely. I was worried about those winding roads, especially at night. I thought you might get lost." I waved that off and picked my bag up again. "No, I had directions. I couldn't get lost." "Oh, you folks and your technology," she said. I was not sure what she meant by you folks. Young people, maybe city people, maybe both. "Let me make you some tea, and we can chat," she said quickly. "Or coffee. Do you drink coffee? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me show you where to put your things first." She motioned for me to follow her down the hallway. Cosmo trotted behind us, nipping at my heels and letting out sharp little yips. "I'd love some coffee, thank you," I said. I could feel sleep creeping up on me, but I did not want to be rude and go straight to bed after she had opened her home to me. She opened the door to a guest bedroom and stepped aside. The room was spotless. The bed covers were tucked in so neatly that it looked like a hotel room nobody had ever used. There was a rocking chair in one corner, a small bedside table covered with a doily, and a little deer figurine placed carefully on top of it. Across from the bed was a large mirror. I set my bag down on the floor and looked around. "I can only drink decaf," Joan told me, still smiling, "but I keep regular coffee around for guests." She put on a pot of coffee while I sat at the kitchen table and looked around her house. It was old, but it had been well cared for. It had that comfortable look of a place someone had loved for a long time. The kitchen had a big skylight above the stove, and I imagined how nice it must sound when rain hit the glass. I had one in the living room of my new place, too, or at least I would, once I could finally move in. "So," Joan said as she reached up to take 2 mugs from a cabinet, "when will your place be available again?" I shrugged and ran a hand through my hair. "They said it should be ready in the next few days. It better be, because that's when the moving truck is supposed to get here." I laughed lightly. I wouldn't want to have to move all my stuff in here. She blew air out between her lips. "Well, I do need some lawn decorations." I laughed again. "They're just doing some final cleaning and checking that all the appliances work. I wouldn't be bothering you if my lease hadn't ended already." Leaving my old place had been harder than I expected. Packing up my apartment, saying goodbye to friends, walking out of familiar streets for the last time, all of it had felt heavier than I thought it would. Moving here to work at my father's lumber company was not exactly the exciting new adventure I had once imagined for myself, but it was a serious step up. It paid better, came with more responsibility, and gave me a chance to start fresh. After years in the city, part of me thought it might be nice to live in a quiet forest town. Maybe the solitude would be good for me. Maybe I would finally write something instead of just talking about writing. "No, you're not a bother at all," Joan said. The kettle beeped,
and she poured hot water into her own mug over a tea bag. The room filled with the smell of strong coffee, and it calmed my nerves a little. It's nice having a warm body around. I haven't had much of that since my son moved out. That was when I noticed the pictures on the fridge. They were held there with magnets, shaped like fruit. Most of them were of a man around my age. In one, he stood beside Joan. In another, he stood with a young woman on graduation day. I wondered how long he had been gone. "Is that him?" I asked, pointing toward the fridge. "Yes, that's my boy," she said. She moved quickly to open the fridge door and started searching for milk, blocking my view of the photos. Cosmo whined at my feet. I reached down to pat his head, but he nipped at my hand, so I pulled it back. He seemed nervous now, not excited. His eyes kept flicking around the room. "Matt," Joan said. She was suddenly standing right in front of me, and I jumped. I smiled apologetically, embarrassed by my own reaction. She handed me the mug of coffee, and I took it. "There are some things I need to talk to you about," she said. I frowned and looked up at her. She sat across from me, and the warmth had faded from her face. "What things?" "I don't know if you've ever lived in a place like this before." I glanced up at the ceiling, trying to understand what she meant. "I've lived in small towns before, if that's what you mean. I went to college in a pretty small community." "It's not that," she said, sipping her tea without seeming to taste it. "Although I'm glad to hear it. What is it, then?" She hesitated. Her fingernails tapped softly against the side of her mug for a long time. Her droopy eye blinked slower than the other, like it was half a beat behind. Again, I felt bad for noticing, so I looked away. "This place is different," she said at last. "I know your parents didn't tell you anything, and that's because they don't know. We keep it quiet around here." "Yeah?" I said slowly. Her face was so serious now that it made me uncomfortable. Without the big smile, something about her looked strange and almost uncanny. Maybe it was just the kitchen light. Maybe it was the long drive catching up with me. She sighed and nodded to herself, as if she was choosing her words carefully. "It's really nothing to worry yourself sick over. We're all used to it around here. You learn to adapt." I wanted her to just say it already, but I also did not want to be rude. She had been kind enough to let me stay. "There's a thing," she said. "A thing around here. I think it came from the forest. Maybe it evolved from something else thousands of years ago." "Tell me, do you know much about folklore?" I said, my coffee growing cold between my hands. "Do you mean like the Wendigo? Stuff like that?" I knew enough about myths and legends from places surrounded by forests. Every small town had stories. But I had not expected Joan to take that kind of thing seriously. My mother had never told me her old friend was superstitious. "Yes, like that," Joan said. "But this is something nobody has really written about. There are stories that are similar, but not the same. Outside of this town, no one knows about it." She leaned forward slightly. Her hair fell in thin curtains around her face. "I need to warn you, so you know what to do if you encounter it. Because you will. Because you will." Those words sent a chill straight through me. She did not say if. She said when. Like this was not a strange possibility, but something inevitable. A thing waiting in the path of everyone who lived here. I was never good with scary stories, especially when they were told quietly in kitchens at night. Part of me wondered if she was trying to scare me as some local prank. Maybe she was hazing me. Maybe the people here did not like outsiders, and this was her way of making sure I knew I did not belong. "Okay," I said carefully. "I know it sounds strange," she said. "I know you probably don't believe me. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you." I swallowed. "Okay, there is a thing here with no real name. Some people call it a mimic. Some call it an echo. The more dramatic ones call it the actor. Children usually call it the copycat. She let out a small laugh, but it sounded thin and wrong. That's what my son called it when he was little. What does it do? I asked, even though I was not sure I wanted the answer. Well, she said, dragging one finger around the rim of her mug, it mimics. Mimics what? Anything, she shook her head slowly. Really, anything physical. Trees, lampposts. Animals, people. I looked down at my hands. I did not believe her. Not really. But I could feel the skin on my arms tightening. The room suddenly felt hot and close. Whether she was lying or truly believed this, she was scaring me. If it mimics things, I asked, how do people know about it? The consequences, she said quietly. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep myself still. The consequences of breaking the rules, she continued, and because sometimes it makes mistakes. A dog with 3 eyes, a tree with skin like a person, a mailbox that breathes. Sometimes it doesn't fully understand what it's copying, but it has been getting better over time. What are the consequences? I asked. Her expression softened into sadness. She set her tea aside and wrung her hands on the table. A couple of years ago, there was a nice family a few streets over. The wife broke the rules. Whatever you do, if you encounter it, you must pretend everything is normal. You must play along. If you acknowledge that it is imitating something, it gives it permission. Cosmo whined and curled near my feet, moving anxiously. He pressed his nose against my shin as if trying to warn me. Permission to do what, Joan? She shrugged, and her eyebrows pulled together. We don't know exactly. No one really saw it except the husband, and he would never tell anyone what happened. All we know is that when she woke up, she had 2 children instead of 1. When she told the mimic it wasn't her daughter, Joan stopped and swallowed. Whatever it did to her left a terrible mess. The whole town smelled like rotten meat for weeks. Jesus, I whispered. I leaned back in my chair. For a simple urban legend, this was too detailed. I still wanted to think she was lying, but her distress looked real. She seemed like such a kind woman. I could not understand why she would make something like this up just to scare me. It changes every midnight, she said. Every night it becomes something different. There will be days when you don't see it at all. Many days, maybe, it might be something small, something you would never notice, or it might not be focused on you. But if it does focus on you, I need to know you will be able to handle it. I need to know you'll be okay. Wait, I said, rubbing both hands over my face. What exactly am I supposed to do? I mean, if I encounter it, theoretically, she raised one finger. Do not bring it inside your home. If you see a nice chair on the side of the road and something about it feels off, leave it there. If you see a sad, stray puppy, do not bring it in. If someone comes to your door asking for a glass of water, or if they look like an old friend but you were not expecting company, do not let them inside. Once it has access to your house, it can pretend to be anything inside. Okay, I said. Got it, she raised a second finger. Never touch it. Never let it touch you. If it touches you, it learns about you. It can become attached to you. If it touches you, it can mimic you. Her face filled with a sad kind of fear. This can be hard to avoid because it wants to touch you. It will make excuses. That is why you do not want it inside your home. Okay, I said again, though my voice came out weaker this time. Not only that, Matt, if it touches you, you will never be able to leave. I wanted the conversation to end. I wanted to go to sleep. I wanted to wake up in the morning and laugh about how strange my first night here had been. This was not how I wanted to begin my new life. Sitting in a kitchen with a woman I barely knew while she told me about a creature that could become anything and trap me forever. But she raised the third finger and looked directly into my eyes. Never, she said, ever let it know that you know what it is. Cosmo started barking. I almost jumped out of my chair. He ran in circles around the kitchen, barking at nothing, pacing and turning and whining between sharp bursts of sound. My heart was racing. I looked back at Joan. She was not looking at the dog. She was looking at me, studying my face like she was trying to decide if I believed her. I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. It did not work very well. I think I need to call it a night, Joan. Can we talk about this more in the morning? She nodded, though she almost looked disappointed. She took my mug, still nearly full of cold coffee, and picked up her own tea as well. Of course, honey, she said. I'm sorry to scare you. It's getting late anyway. I have to go soon. Get some rest. Cosmo, lay down. Cosmo did not listen. He barked at me and backed into the doorway. I could not sleep. The guest bedroom had seemed sweet and welcoming when I first saw it, but now it felt wrong. The neat bed, the rocking chair, the deer figurine, the mirror across from the bed, all of it seemed too still. The mirror bothered me most. It made me think of old stories I had heard as a kid about never putting a mirror across from where you sleep. Something about spirits or demons coming through at night and taking you. I lay there staring at the dark shape of my own reflection and tried not to think about Joan's warning, not because I believed it. I told myself I did not. But if it was true, how would I know whether it had ever been inside this house? How would I know if it was the chair I had sat in, or the coffee mug I had held, or even the bed beneath me? If Joan really believed all of this, it seemed like an awful way to live. Every object could be a threat. Every person could be pretending. Every friendly face could be a trap. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep. It only felt like a few minutes before I opened my eyes again with a start. Cosmo was barking somewhere in the house. The house itself was silent except for him. No footsteps, no voice calling for him to stop, no Joan gently scolding him. He barked again and again, the sound sharp and frantic. He had been acting strange all night. I wondered if he was always like that, or if something was wrong with him. Maybe he was sick. Maybe the move, my arrival, or the stormy air had upset him. I waited for Joan to calm him, but her voice never came. After a while, I got up. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to the bedroom door. I placed my hand on the knob and hesitated. A stupid thought crossed my mind. What if the door was the thing? I almost laughed at myself. I was being ridiculous. Joan had gotten inside my head. I opened the door, wincing at the squeak of the hinges. Something dark rushed down the hallway toward me. My hand flew to my chest, and I stumbled backward. Then it got close enough for me to see that it was only Cosmo. He was panting and shaking. He spun in a circle in front of me, then looked down the hallway. "What?" I whispered. "What is it?" He ran back down the hall, and after a moment of hesitation, I followed him. The kitchen was brighter than the hallway because moonlight spilled through the windows and turned everything pale. I blinked a few times, letting my eyes adjust. The house felt different in the middle of the night. Quieter, colder, bigger somehow. I glanced at the clock on the stove. Bright green numbers read 1:22 a.m. My eyes drifted to the fridge. In the dark, the photos of Joan and her son looked strange, like pictures from someone else's life that had been left behind after everyone in them was gone. I stepped closer. There was Joan, younger and smiling with her son. There she was holding him when he was little. In those photos, she looked like the woman from my mother's college pictures. Her eyes were brown, like I had originally thought. Maybe they only looked darker in the pictures. Maybe age had lightened them somehow. Maybe the condition that made her eye droop had changed them. Then I looked at a more recent photo. It showed Joan in this very kitchen with another woman around her age. Joan had the same wrinkles, the same half-gray hair, the same smile, but her eyes were dark, both of them, and neither side of her face drooped. My stomach tightened. Then I noticed a white slip of paper held under a strawberry-shaped magnet. I knew I should not snoop, but my hand moved before I could stop myself. I pulled it free and held it close to the light from the stove. It was a note. "Hi, Matt. If you're reading this, your mother must have contacted you. I'm so sorry I had to slip out. My friend's sink flooded, and I had to help her pack up some of her things. I'll be back first thing in the morning. Help yourself to anything. I have tea, decaf, and regular coffee for guests. Sorry again. See you soon, Joan." I read it twice. Then a third time. The words did not change. Joan had not been home when I arrived. The woman who greeted me at the door, hugged me, made coffee, and warned me about the mimic was not Joan. Cosmo snarled. He was standing with his paws on the windowsill, staring out into the night. His teeth were bared, and a low growl came from his chest. With shaking hands, I set the note down on the counter. I walked toward him slowly. My heartbeat was so loud in the quiet kitchen that I could almost hear it. I reached down and took hold of Cosmo's collar, partly to keep him from jumping at the window, and partly because I needed something solid to hold. Outside, under the streetlights, there was a man. He stood directly in front of the house, looking in. He was too far away for me to see every detail clearly, but close enough for me to know something was wrong. He raised his arms and waved them in a strange mockery of a friendly greeting. His smile was huge, stretched across his face in a way that reminded me of the smile the false Joan had worn. His legs were spread too far apart, like a newborn deer trying to stand for the first time. He shifted his weight awkwardly, as if he had only recently learned how legs were supposed to work. His eyes were too low on his face. Every part of him was slightly off, like a child had tried to draw a person from memory and almost got it right. But the hair was close. The build was close. And he was wearing my clothes. It was me. I do not remember deciding to run. One moment I was standing in the kitchen, holding Cosmo's collar and staring at myself outside the house. The next, I was moving. I grabbed my keys. I forgot my overnight bag. I forgot almost everything. By the time I realized I had left the bag behind, I was already driving away from the house and almost out of town. I did not care. I just wanted to leave. I drove fast through the winding roads, my hands clenched around the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. The trees leaned over the road, swallowing the headlights. Every curve felt like it was trying to turn me back. Every shadow between the trunks looked like a person standing still, watching me go. Then the fear changed. At first, I thought I was only scared because of what I had seen. Anyone would be. But as I got farther from the town, the fear became something else. It grew stronger with every mile. It washed over me in waves so intense that I could barely breathe. It was not normal fear. It was physical. It hurt. It felt like the pain I remembered from breaking my arm as a child, only spread through my whole body. It was heavy and strange and otherworldly. The farther I drove, the worse it became. It felt like I was descending into hell. It felt like the road was carrying me out of the world I knew and into a place where nothing existed except loneliness and pain. It felt like I was being peeled away from myself, like I was skin being torn from a body. Then came the thought that broke me. If I kept driving, the world would end. I knew it did not make sense. I knew it was impossible, but the feeling was stronger than logic. Every part of me screamed that if I drove one more mile away from that town, something terrible would happen. Not just to me, to everything. I had to stop the car. I pulled over on the side of the road, shaking so badly I could barely put it in park. My breath came in short, desperate gasps. The trees on both sides of the road were black walls in the headlights. The road ahead was empty, but it felt forbidden. Then I thought about going back, and the fear softened. Not all at once, but enough for me to notice. The thought of driving back to Joan's house and climbing into the guest bed suddenly felt like the most comforting thing in the world. It felt like warmth, safety. It felt like being a child again and having my mother hug me after my first day of school. It felt like heaven. The bed, the house, the kitchen, even the mirror in the guest room, all of it seemed peaceful now. All of it seemed like home. That scared me worse than anything, because I knew those feelings were not mine. I knew something had touched me in some way I did not understand. Maybe it happened when the false Joan hugged me at the door. Maybe it happened when she took my hands. Maybe it happened when she handed me the coffee mug. Maybe it happened before I even knew I was in danger. But Joan's warning came back to me. Never touch it. Never let it touch you. If it touches you, you will never be able to leave. I sat there on the side of the road trying to force myself to drive forward, but I could not. My body would not obey me. The thought of leaving became unbearable. The thought of returning became sweet. I turned the car around. I do not think I will ever be able to leave. Not really. I think the town has me now. Or the thing has me. Maybe there is no difference. I keep telling myself I will try again. I keep telling myself there has to be a way out. But every time I think about driving past those winding roads, the fear comes back. It builds inside me until I cannot breathe, until the whole world feels like it is about to split apart. So I stay. And I wait. Sometimes I see things outside my window. A mailbox that was not there before. A deer standing too still near the tree line. A woman walking down the road at night with Joan's hair, but not her walk. Once I saw myself again, standing under the same streetlight, smiling like it wanted me to smile back. I do not tell it that I know. I do not speak to it. I do not invite anything in. But I know it is still learning. I know it is getting better. So if anyone ever tells you a story like this, please listen. If an old woman in a quiet forest town warns you about a thing that copies people, do not laugh it off. Do not tell yourself it is just local superstition. Do not stay to be polite. Do not let it touch you. Do not let it inside. And most of all, get out while you still can. Story 2. I do not remember how I got here. That is the first thing I need to say, because it is the part that keeps digging at me more than anything else. I do not remember driving here, walking here, being brought here, or even falling asleep before I woke up. 1 second, there was nothing. Just a deep black space where memory should have been. And then I opened my eyes in a bed that was not mine, with a headache so sharp it felt like someone had split my skull with an axe. A fire alarm was screaming above me, loud enough to make my teeth hurt. And a voice crackled through an old speaker somewhere in the room. It was deep, smooth, and strange, almost like an old radio host from some show my grandfather would have listened to. The voice said, "Fire department. Roll over on Hangman's Fork." I sat up too fast and nearly fell out of the bed. My head pounded, and for a second the whole room spun around me. I was not in my bedroom. I was in a large bunk room lined with rows of narrow beds. The walls were plain, old, and yellowed by time. The sheets were stiff, and smelled faintly of smoke, soap, and sweat. None of it looked familiar. None of it felt real. I tried to speak, but before I could even ask where I was, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. Suddenly, I was standing in a line with 3 other men. They were all firefighters, or at least they looked like firefighters from an old calendar. Tall, wide-shouldered, thick-muscled men with neat mustaches and hard bodies shaped by years of heavy work. They slapped my shoulders like they were greeting an old friend, but their smiles made my stomach turn. They were too wide, too tight, too pleased, like they had been waiting for me to wake up. "Welcome, newbie," one of them said. I wanted to tell them I was not a newbie. I wanted to say I did not belong there. I wanted to demand answers, but the alarm kept screaming, and the men pushed me along like I was already part of their crew. The line moved toward a fire pole at the end of the room. One by one, the men grabbed it and slid down through the open hole in the floor. When my turn came, I hesitated just long enough for one of them to shove me between the shoulder blades. I caught the pole with both hands and slid down, my palms burning as I dropped through the darkness between floors. On the way down, I caught my first glimpse of the station below. It was beautiful, but in an old and unsettling way. Everything looked polished, cared for, and wrong. In the center bay sat an open cab fire engine painted a deep blood red, the kind of red fire departments stopped using decades ago. The chrome on it shone like a mirror. The brass fittings gleamed under the station lights. Along one wall stood rows of tall, narrow lockers, the type you only see in old photographs or museums. The whole place looked like it had been pulled out of another century and kept alive by force. When my boots hit the floor, I stumbled forward and nearly crashed into the nearest locker. My name was stenciled across the front of it. At least I think it was my name. I stared at the letters and felt a strange emptiness open inside me, because I could read them, but I could not connect them to myself. The name was there. It belonged to me. But when I tried to remember hearing it spoken, when I tried to remember signing it or saying it out loud, there was nothing. My own name felt like a word I had just learned. Inside the locker was turnout gear. But it was wrong, too. There was no modern coat with reflective stripes, no proper bunker pants, no lightweight helmet, no air pack waiting beside it. Instead, there were thick, cracked leather pieces, a heavy all-leather coat stiff with age, and oversized black hip boots that looked like they belonged in a museum, not on a real fire ground. I reached for the first boot because everyone else was already dressing, and I knew I had no time to think. I shoved my foot into it. Something stabbed deep into the bottom of my foot. I screamed and yanked my foot back out. Pain shot up my leg. A sewing needle was stuck through my sock, already wet with blood. For 1 second, I just stared at it, unable to understand why there would be a needle in a fire boot. Then, laughter exploded behind me. "Never gets old," one of the men said, slapping me on the back hard enough to make me stumble. My hands shook as I pulled the needle free. I checked the other boot. Another needle was waiting inside it, angled perfectly to drive into my foot if I had stepped in without looking. More laughter broke out behind me. "We got a smart one," somebody muttered in a British accent. I wanted to throw the boots across the room. Instead, I pulled out the second needle and forced my feet into them anyway. My socks were already sticky with blood. I clipped the ancient leather coat shut over my chest and grabbed a faded helmet from the locker shelf. The leather smelled old and sour, like smoke that had settled into it 100 years ago and never left. A massive man stepped from the shadows near the station office. He was larger than the others, with a broad chest, heavy arms, and eyes that seemed to look through people instead of at them. He slammed a door shut so hard the walls rattled. "Let's go." He roared. Then his voice dropped. "Where's the new guy?" Someone behind me muttered in a high, squeaky voice, "That fucking guy." The chief turned his head and shot him a glare so cold that the man looked down at his boots. I swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Yes, sir," I said. The chief's eyes moved over me slowly. A smile crept across his face, but there was nothing kind in it. "Jump on the back," he said. "And hold on," my heart hammered as I followed the others to the rig. I should have refused. I should have run. But there was something in that station, some pressure in the air, that made disobeying feel impossible. I grabbed the polished chrome rail and swung onto the rear step. The engineer climbed behind the wheel. The chief took the shotgun seat, and two of the other men joined me at the back. The truck groaned to life with a mournful cry that did not sound like any engine I had ever heard. Black diesel smoke rolled over us, thick and choking, and it tasted like iron and old fire. The whole rig shivered beneath my hands. I could not believe we were allowed to ride back there. Even when I was a kid, firemen did not ride on the back steps anymore. That only existed in old movies, parades, and faded photographs from before safety rules caught up with tradition. But there I was, gripping cold chrome, my bloodied feet inside ancient boots, while the fire engine trembled like it knew every hand that had ever held on to it. For a strange second, I felt like the truck was remembering them. Every firefighter, every call, every scream, every death. And somehow, it was deciding whether I belonged with them. One of the men beside me stomped hard on the steel bed and shouted toward the cab in a deep British accent. "All set, Cap'n." The truck answered with a low, ugly sound. It sat trembling in the doorway like an animal straining against a leash. The engine coughed out a wet, uneven whine. The gears bit hard. Metal screamed under us. Then the wheels broke loose so violently that it nearly threw me off the back. I clutched the rail with both hands and felt my shoulders wrench. The noise coming from the engine was not mechanical anymore. It sounded wounded. Furious, the red light began sweeping slowly across the darkness outside the station in wide, patient arcs. It was not frantic like modern emergency lights. It was not quick or sharp. It moved like something that already knew where you were and did not need to search. The headlights flared next, thick yellow beams pinning the road ahead in place. Then the sirens started. My stomach dropped. The sound stretched into a long, broken howl that crawled up my spine. It was not a warning siren. It did not sound like something meant to clear traffic or save lives. It sounded like an animal that had finally caught the scent of something weaker than itself. The truck flew down the road. I still do not know how the engineer kept it from flipping. We leaned hard through corners, boots skidding across steel, shoulders slamming together as the rear of the truck swung wide. The town around us blurred under the red light. Wind tore at my face. Smoke rolled backward over the step. One of the men beside me, the biggest one with the old British accent, leaned close enough for me to hear him over the engine. "Welcome, proper newbie," he shouted. "What'd you do to deserve this?" "I can't remember," I shouted back. He laughed low and rough. "Good, easier that way." Then he leaned closer, his smile stretching under his mustache. "Can you remember your name?" I opened my mouth, ready to answer, but nothing came. My name was on the locker. I had read it. I knew it should be easy, but inside my head there was only a blank wall. "No," I said. Another laugh rolled out of him. "Well, newbie, my name's Jack. Welcome to the brigade." He nodded toward the other firefighter clinging to the step. That man was thinner, with restless eyes and a grin that kept twitching at the corners of his mouth. "That's Jambalaya," Jack said. "Don't try too hard to understand him. Those French yokels are half-mute anyway. Jambalaya gave a strange little giggle and said something under his breath that sounded half like a curse and half like a joke. The driver's name is Ferry, Jack continued. And the chief? I asked before I could stop myself. Jack's smile faded. His name is Chief, he said. Don't ever ask for anything else. I looked toward the cab and saw the chief's broad shoulders in silhouette, unmoving even as the truck threw the rest of us around. Something about him made me believe Jack immediately. When I finally dared to look up again, I realized we were passing through a city, but it was not right. Tall skyscrapers stood jammed against tiny houses with sagging roofs. Huge factories were wedged between apartment buildings as if someone had dropped them from the sky and never bothered to clean up the damage. A church steeple leaned beside a glass office tower. A diner with neon lights sat under the shadow of a brick smokestack. Nothing matched. Nothing fit. Streets crossed at wrong angles. Windows glowed from buildings that looked abandoned. Other buildings were dark, even though I could see shapes moving inside. There were barely any people out. The few figures I saw did not seem to walk as much as drift. They moved along sidewalks, with their heads down, shoulders bent, faces hidden by shadow. They looked like lost souls who had forgotten where they were supposed to go. One woman stood at a crosswalk with no traffic in sight, and did not move even when the light changed. A man in a suit stared into the window of a closed shop, his hand pressed against the glass. No one reacted to the siren. No one looked at us as we passed. A feeling settled deep in my stomach before I even understood it. This was not a city built for people. It was a place built to contain them. Soon the city disappeared behind us. The buildings thinned, then vanished completely, and there was only corn. An endless ocean of dead stalks stretched through the darkness on both sides of the road. Even under the red flashing lights, I could tell something was wrong with the fields. The corn was shriveled and black, like it had died standing upright and had been left there for years. The stalks scratched against each other in the wind, making a dry, whispering sound that somehow carried over the engine. The truck began downshifting with a hungry growl. Jack slapped me hard across the back. "You're on the nozzle, boy." Before I could ask what that meant, the engine skidded to a halt. The sudden stop nearly threw me forward. The truck groaned, then started moaning from somewhere deep inside when the engineer threw it into pump gear. It was a wet, starving sound, like the rig itself had opened its mouth. Jack dragged me toward the center-mounted hose rail, while Jambalaya laughed behind us. "Hope it's a good one," he shouted in his thick southern drawl. Jack shoved a brass smoothbore nozzle into my hands. It was heavy, cold, and worn smooth by years of use. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be right behind you." I ran toward the front of the truck with the hose line dragging behind me. As my boots hit the road, memories started forcing their way back into my head in broken, painful flashes. I remembered my old fire hall. I remembered real engines, real radios, and real calls. I remembered wrecks on highways at night, the smell of fuel and blood, the crunch of glass under boots. I remembered standing in the rain beside a crushed minivan after an 18-wheeler hit it head-on. A mother had been trapped inside with the engine block pushed into her lap. She held my hand with everything she had left while we tried to cut her free. I told her she was going to be okay. I said it with the calm voice they teach you to use, but I knew it was a lie. Everyone on scene knew. There was nothing we could do. I remembered watching the life leave her eyes while the drunk driver who hit her sat on the curb with barely a scratch. They always did. For a long time, I thought that was the worst thing I would ever see. I was wrong. Because none of that compares to what this town has. When I rounded the front of the fire truck, There was no fire. There was a wrecked car, yes, twisted metal scattered across the road, but no flames, no smoke, no trapped family, no leaking gas, just a broken vehicle, sitting crooked in the Deadfield Road, its headlights pointing at the corn. Two sheriffs stood on either side of a screaming man, holding him upright. The man was thin, pale, and wild-eyed. Blood ran from a cut above one eyebrow, and one of his shoes was missing. But he was not screaming for help. He was screaming, "Let me go." A massive motorcycle cop rolled up on an old Indian motorcycle with chrome polished so bright it caught the emergency lights like blood in water. His vintage leather boots hit the pavement hard as he kicked down the stand. He pulled off his gloves slowly, looking at the wreck and then at the man held between the deputies. "Well, boys," he said in a low, gravelly voice, "what have we got ourselves here?" Jack leaned close to my ear. "Just hold on until they give the order," he whispered. "Never know what the locals want to do with a runaway." The word runaway made my skin crawl. The head sheriff circled the man slowly, like a wolf, deciding where to bite first. He wore an old uniform with a wide-brimmed hat and a badge that looked too bright in the red light. His face was calm. That was worse than anger. The screaming man watched him with frightened eyes, his head moving back and forth as if he was looking for a way out and already knew there was none. The sheriff stopped directly in front of him. "You get one chance before the firehouse gets you," he said calmly. "Now where is the girl?" The man started pleading right away. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just driving down the road, and then bam, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. Your cops drove me off the road." The sheriff did not blink. Wrong answer, then he turned toward us. "Well, Chief," he said, "you know what to do." The fire truck screamed to life behind me. The hose line kicked violently in our hands, swelling like something alive. The nozzle bucked, and I nearly dropped it. Jack leaned close to me again. "Get him real good," he whispered. Another set of hands grabbed the hose behind us. Jambalaya was laughing under his breath. "He's gonna get it now," he muttered. The sheriff stepped aside, but the deputies kept the man pinned in place. The man fought harder, sobbing now. "No, please, please, I don't know anything. I didn't do anything. Chief." The sheriff barked. Rookie hoses him. The truck siren wailed, and red light washed over the man's terrified face. My hands burned against the hose line as I slowly started cracking the valve open. I did not know what would come out. Water, maybe, or something worse. In that place, I could not trust anything to be what it looked like. Then, something tugged at my coat. I froze and looked down. A little girl stood beside me. She could not have been older than 6. She wore a small dress that looked too clean for the road, and her hair hung around her face in soft, messy waves. Her blue eyes stared up at me with an innocence so complete it hurt to look at her. The truck fell silent. The world stopped moving. The siren died. The red lights seemed to dim. Even Jack looked shaken. The little girl held the edge of my old leather coat in one tiny hand. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered. "I need help." Jack slowly crouched down in front of her. He removed his old leather helmet and set it gently on the ground, as if he was entering a church. "Well, miss," he said carefully, his voice softer than I thought it could be, "what are you doing out here all by yourself?" The little girl burst into tears. "I can't remember," she cried. "I want my mommy." Then she wrapped her arms around Jack's neck. Everything went quiet in a way that felt holy and terrible at the same time. The man between the deputies stopped screaming for a second. The sheriffs stood still. Jambalaya lowered the axe I had not even noticed him holding. Chief moved toward the rig and grabbed the radio mic. "Dispatch, this is Chief requesting a 777 to the scene," he said. And please hurry. Jack, the same man who laughed when needles stabbed into my feet, had tears streaming down his face. He held the little girl carefully, like she was made of glass. "You're going to be okay, lass," he whispered. "I'll make sure of it." He carried her around the truck and out of sight. The rest of us remained frozen. I still had the nozzle in my hands, but I no longer wanted to open it. Whatever the screaming man had done or not done, something in me knew the girl mattered more. The whole scene had shifted around her. Even the fire engine seemed to be holding its breath. Meanwhile, Jambalaya started walking toward the screaming man with an axe in his hands. The sheriff stepped between them before he could get close. Jambalaya kept rambling about cutting the man in half, his grin wide and hungry, while the sheriff calmly smiled. "Don't worry," the sheriff said. "Ems is coming," Jambalaya burst out laughing. "Oh, yes," he said. "Better get him checked out." Chief stepped beside me and gave a small nod. "Good work, rookie," he said quietly. Holding off was the right call. I did not know if I had made a choice or simply frozen in fear, but I was not going to argue with him. Time seemed to stop after that. The deputies stood motionless beside the man, who had finally gone quiet. He looked like he understood now that he was not leaving. His eyes had changed. He was no longer searching for help. He was staring at the truck, the sheriffs, the fields, and all of us like the truth had finally reached him and broken something inside. Jack sat in the cab of the truck with a little girl on his lap while she played with the sirens and whistles. The sounds coming from the engine had changed. Earlier, the truck sounded animal-like, wounded and hunting. Now the sirens sounded cheerful, almost circus-like. Even the lights had changed. Instead of deep red beams sweeping through the dark like searching eyes, 1,000 bright, playful colors danced across the truck and the road around it. The little girl laughed once, small and weak, and Jack smiled down at her while tears still hung on his cheeks. I climbed onto the truck to help Jambalaya reload the hose. He kept humming to himself, but he did not joke as much now. The dead corn whispered around us. The road stretched into darkness in both directions. Then, blinding white headlights washed over the scene. The cleanest patrol car I had ever seen rolled to a stop in front of the engine. It looked out of place here, too new and too perfect, like it had driven in from another world. Chief stepped forward immediately to greet the sheriff climbing out. This sheriff was different from the others. He was young, fit, and clean. His uniform was spotless. His shoes shone under the emergency lights. And his face did not have the worn, hungry look everyone else in that place carried. He looked like he came from somewhere far outside this town, somewhere with real sunlight and normal roads. Jack carefully carried the little girl toward him. "All right, miss," Jack said softly. "You be good now." The sheriff gently lifted her into his arms. "Thank you, Jack." The little girl looked up at him. "Are you taking me back to my mommy?" The sheriff smiled softly, and for the first time since waking up in that station, I saw a smile that did not look wrong. "You'll be back with your family very soon," he said. He placed her carefully into the passenger seat, buckled her in, and closed the door gently. Then he turned back toward us. Jack called out, "Is she going back?" The sheriff stopped. "She will," he answered quietly, "but I gotta hurry before it's too late." Then his eyes landed on me. Everything about him changed instantly. His face went pale. His calm broke. "What's he doing here?" he snapped. The fear in his voice made my heart kick hard. He shouldn't be here. When did he get here? He started toward me fast, but Chief stepped in front of him. "You need to hurry," Chief said firmly. Worry about her, the sheriff tried to push past him again. Jack stepped forward. "For the sake of God," Jack said, Just take her. The sheriff finally stopped struggling, but he kept staring at me like I was standing on a ledge and did not know it. You need to remember. He shouted. Then he looked back at Chief, his jaw tight. I'm coming back for him. Jack and Chief answered at the same time. We'll see about that. The sheriff got back into the patrol car. The tires kicked up dust and dead leaves as he peeled away into the darkness. From atop the truck, I watched his patrol car disappear toward a single bright light far off across the dead fields. The light did not look like a house or a street lamp. It looked like an opening. Then the fire truck began howling again. A 1940s ambulance came screaming down the road, its siren echoing across the cornfields. It was dirty white, long and old, with round headlights and red lights that flashed like tired eyes. It stopped near the wreck, and the rear doors burst open. Two impossibly beautiful nurses stepped out wearing crisp, old-fashioned uniforms. Their white dresses were spotless, their caps perfectly pinned, their hair smooth like they had just walked out of a magazine from another age. They casually chatted about the weather while pulling a gurney from the back. The man started thrashing harder the moment he saw them. No. He screamed. No. 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 Please. The deputy slammed him onto the gurney and pinned his arms down while the nurses strapped him in. One of the nurses had long, bright red fingernails. She smiled as if she was about to give him medicine or ask him how he was feeling. Without warning, she traced one red fingernail down the man's face, hard enough to open the skin. He screamed. "Shut up," she said coldly. He kept screaming anyway. The nurse shrugged. "Don't worry," she said. "The doctor's going to see you soon," everyone laughed. Not the girl's sheriff. He was gone. But the others laughed. The sheriffs, jambalaya, even the motorcycle cop. The sound of it rolled over the road and into the corn. The nurses calmly rolled the man into the ambulance while he continued screaming. His voice echoed from inside the metal box after the doors closed. Then the engine coughed, the siren wailed, and the ambulance drove off into the dark. One of the nurses walked over to Chief carrying a clipboard. She smiled at me as she passed, and her eyes moved over me like she was checking meat at a butcher's counter. "Fresh meat, I see," she said. Chief barely glanced in my direction. "Something like that, all right," she said, holding out the clipboard. "Sign here," she pointed to a line on the form, but her eyes kept drifting toward Jack, who was sitting quietly on the truck bumper with his helmet in his hands. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. "He's usually making jokes about ripping me open." Chief lit a cigar and looked away. "Leave him be." The nurse's smile faded a little, but she did not argue. Chief signed the form, and she took it back to the ambulance. After that, everyone loaded back onto the truck. We rode home in silence. Jack stood on the rear step the entire ride back, his hands wrapped around the chrome rail. That same huge grin was stretched across his face, but tears rolled endlessly down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He did not speak. The dead corn passed behind us. Then the wrong city returned, with its mismatched buildings and drifting people. No one looked at us. No one ever seemed to look at anything too directly in that place. When we reached the station, the truck rolled into the bay and settled with a sigh that sounded almost satisfied. The chief told the others to clean up and told me to come with him. I followed him into a small office near the back of the station. There was an old desk, a metal filing cabinet, a cigar tray, and a computer that looked strangely modern compared to everything else. Chief pointed at the chair. "Reports," he said. I sat down. "I don't know how," I told him. "You'll learn." He left me there. Apparently, nobody here knows how to use a computer. Or maybe they just do not want to. The only thing on this computer is a browser. Every time I click it, Reddit opens. I tried typing other websites, but it always brings me back here. I tried searching my own name, but the words blurred until I could not read them. I tried looking up Hangman's Fork, but the screen went black for a few seconds and then opened this page again. So I guess this is my report. I still do not remember how I got here. I still do not remember my name. Not really. But I remember my old fire hall now. I remember the dead mother in the minivan. I remember the drunk driver walking away. I remember other calls, too, pieces of them coming back in flashes. I remember smoke. I remember a child's shoe in the road. I remember hands reaching through broken glass. I remember saying words I did not believe, because sometimes lying gently is all you can do for the dying. And I remember one more thing now, something I could not remember when the sheriff shouted at me. I remember lights in my rearview mirror. I remember a road at night. I remember being so tired after a shift that the lane lines blurred. I remember thinking I should pull over. I remember my phone buzzing. I remember looking down for 1 second. Only 1 second. I do not know what happened after that. Not yet. But I think the young sheriff knew. I think Chief knows, too. I think everyone here knows what I did before I know it myself. The alarm is quiet now, but I can hear the truck breathing in the bay. Jack is somewhere outside the office, laughing softly and crying at the same time. Jambalaya is sharpening the axe. Chief is smoking his cigar in the dark. And the speaker above me just crackled again. Dispatch has another call. Story 3. The broadcast was supposed to calm everyone down. That was obvious from the first sentence. It was made to make people stay inside, stop asking questions, and believe that what was happening was only another weather problem. The mayor's office kept calling it an emergency weather event, but no one there would explain what made it different from the ordinary spring storms that passed through our county every year. That was the part that troubled me most. We were used to storms. We were used to rain, flooded roads, power cuts, and mud sliding down the hills after a bad week. None of that was new. But this time, every official statement sounded careful, rehearsed, and empty. By then, unauthorized gatherings had already started happening across town. People were standing outside shops, in parking lots, near the courthouse, and under dripping awnings, looking up at the sky as if the clouds might finally say something useful. The county had records of these gatherings. I had seen the reports myself. Even I, as deputy mayor and fourth in the line of leadership, could not get more information. Every request I made came back with the same answer. Residents were reminded not to gather unnecessarily during these unique periods of atmospheric instability. That phrase kept repeating. Unique periods of atmospheric instability. No one explained it. No one seemed willing to admit that it sounded more like a warning than a weather report. The power began failing across town before noon. It did not go out everywhere at once. It blinked street by street, building by building, as if something were testing the grid with slow fingers. The internet failed soon after. Radios still worked, though badly. The emergency notices came through again and again, always saying the same thing. Severe weather conditions. Remain calm. Avoid gatherings. Seek shelter if conditions worsen. Nothing useful. Nothing that explained the pressure in the air or the way people had begun stopping mid-sentence and forgetting what they were saying. The radio reception improved the farther you got from town. That detail bothered me. Near Main Street, the signal became thick and slow, wrapped in static and a strange, dull hum. Standing there, one felt a kind of weight pressing not on the body but on the mind. Thought became harder. Simple questions took longer to answer. People stared at you after you spoke, then replied a few seconds late, as if your words had to travel through water before reaching them. The traffic lights changed in wrong patterns. Red, yellow, green, red again, all without order. At the courthouse annex, one clerk told me in a completely serious voice that the clocks were keeping the correct time, but taking longer to do it. I asked him what he meant. He stared at me for a while and said, "I don't know." The college broadcasts continued all afternoon. Their announcers sounded calm in the way people sound calm when they have been trained never to show fear. He repeated instructions with perfect control, but beneath his voice was something else. A crowd, maybe. A low murmur, or a humming interference that did not seem fully electrical. When you turned the dial between stations, you could hear 3 dull pulses under the static, not beeps, not tones. Pulses. 1, 2, 3, then again. 1, 2, 3. People began speaking softly in that same rhythm without appearing to notice. At first, it was just a few. A man waiting outside the post office. 2 women under the diner, awning. A teenage boy sitting on the curb near the pharmacy with his hands over his ears. Their lips moved gently. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. If you asked them what they were doing, they seemed confused by the question. Everyone was lost inside themselves that afternoon. It had begun as a pleasant spring market day. Those days were usually noisy and untidy. But the county tolerated them because people spent money and local farmers needed the trade. There were produce stalls, homemade jams, honey, flowers, cheap crafts, and folding tables that always leaned a little to one side. Children ran between the stalls. Old men argued near the diner. People complained about prices and weather with the comfort of long practice. By mid-afternoon, all of that had changed. The market was being taken down early because of the storm. People stood outside the diner and storefronts, not shopping, not talking much, just staring at the sky. They discussed cloud formations with the serious tone usually reserved for funerals, failed harvests, or the closing of a factory. The clouds were low and uneven. They moved without appearing to go anywhere. Inside the mayor's office, the barometer had been dropping all morning. At first, we joked about it because that was easier. Then, it kept falling. By noon, the pressure was low enough to ache behind the eyes. 2 people got nosebleeds during a staff meeting and tried to pretend it was nothing. Several county officials exchanged looks they did not have the courage to explain. The rain began shortly after 3 o'clock. It did not stop. I first saw the woman while helping market staff take apart the last produce stalls near the park in front of the library. I did not notice her all at once. It was more like noticing a sound that had already been in the room for some time. She was crossing the park path, walking out from between the rose bushes as if she had been there all along. She wore brown clothes, all worn but carefully arranged. She carried a violin case covered in dark, scaly leather, aged and almost black from use. The brim of her hat covered the upper half of her face. No one else seemed to notice her at first. She had already crossed half the square before heads began turning. Her outline flickered slightly, like a bad television signal, or like the town itself was having trouble keeping her shape steady. I knew at once that she was not the kind of person our ordinances were made to deal with. Our county sometimes received drifters, even with the northern roads getting worse near Briar Hills and the old bridge crossings becoming unreliable after every flood. Usually, drifters came in looking tired and beaten. They carried failure on their faces. They smelled of wet clothes, bus stations, cheap cigarettes, and long roads. This woman did not move like someone looking for permission. She crossed the square with the calm of someone entering a place that already belonged to her. By dusk, The rain had grown heavy enough to erase the hills beyond the courthouse windows. The whole town seemed cut off from the rest of the world. Later that evening, after supper, I saw her again. She was walking alone toward Main Street under the failing light. I followed her, though I told myself I was only doing so because of my office. By the time I reached the square, she was gone. The storm continued all night. Thunder moved closer from the western valley, not suddenly, but step by step, like something large approaching in the dark. After midnight, radio reception broke down into long stretches of static, but beneath it, the three pulses remained. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. By morning, the barometer had still not risen. The next morning, traffic stopped near Silas Mercer's hardware and feed store. The congestion was bad enough to block the factory crossing and slow freight movement through town. I walked there personally, expecting a collision, a flooded drain, or some fallen tree. Instead, I found a crowd gathered shoulder to shoulder around the woman from the park. She stood in front of the store already playing the violin. The factory shift bell had not rung yet. Men who should have been on their way to work stood in the road with lunch pails hanging from their hands. A delivery truck sat abandoned at an angle in the intersection, its driver standing on the curb with his mouth open. People blocked the most important crossing in town without complaint. No one honked. No one shouted. No one even seemed aware that anything was wrong. No one spoke. Crowds usually make noise. They push, complain, joke, cough, and shift their weight. This crowd did none of that. They stood with complete attention, and their stillness had the stiff, waiting quality of animals before an earthquake. The tune she played did not sound like any local music I knew. There were pieces of mountain reels in it, maybe, and old church songs, but both had been changed into something thinner and stranger. It did not feel ancient exactly. It felt like music that had been practiced for so long that everyone had forgotten what it was originally for. The crowd began mouthing the rhythm under the melody. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. They did it silently, at first, lips moving, heads tilting slightly. Several people did not appear to be looking at the musician at all. They stared past her, or through her, as if listening to another performance that only they could see. The sound she made seemed too large for one instrument. It should not have been possible for a single violin to carry that far, or to press so strongly against the chest. Beneath the high notes was a deeper pulse, like some buried machine striking under the foundations of the town. That was when I noticed the crowd was breathing together. Inhale, hold, release, 1, 2, 3. Somewhere nearby, there was a strong smell of wet iron and blood. My own breathing had not changed. I made note of that. At the time, it seemed important. Behind her, the traffic lights along Main Street changed together. Every one of them. No intersection in town was wired to do that. Beyond the square, the factory whistle answered 3 times. An old man near the curb had begun bleeding from the nose. He did not wipe it away. A woman held her child too tightly while tears streamed down her face. The child hummed softly in harmony with the violin. As I approached, the woman looked directly at me. Something moved inside my chest when she did. I will not call it fear, though perhaps it was. It was too private and too embarrassing to name. I had to remind myself more than once that I was deputy mayor. In the mayor's absence, it was my responsibility to restore order. I tried to disperse the crowd with my voice first. I told people to clear the intersection. I reminded them that emergency conditions were in effect. I said they were blocking traffic and interfering with essential services. Nobody listened. They ignored me with such complete calm that it felt less like disrespect and more like I had become invisible. An older woman grabbed my hand and tried to dance with me in the road. Her eyes were wet and unfocused. Her feet moved carefully to the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I pulled away and pushed through the crowd until I stood directly in front of the musician. Only then did I realize I had forgotten what I meant to say. She changed the tempo as I came close. Without breaking eye contact, she let the melody hang unfinished in the air, holding one note against another in a way that made my chest hurt. The whole crowd seemed to lean toward the unresolved sound. Then, while the last chord trembled across Main Street, she reached out with her free hand and pinched my nose between two fingers. The crowd laughed. It was brief, but it cut into me more than I expected. My face grew hot. I felt suddenly like a schoolboy being mocked. Then the rhythm changed. The music stopped sounding like a dance. It became sharp, hard, and metallic. The hidden pulse beneath the street sped up. Several people in the crowd stiffened at the same moment, as if they had received an order. A man grabbed my shoulder and shoved me hard enough to put one knee on the pavement. Others moved inward immediately. They did not shout. They did not look angry. Their faces remained distant and thoughtful, but their bodies moved together with clear purpose. A woman lost one shoe and did not stop to retrieve it. For several seconds, the crowd stopped behaving like separate people. The musician did not look at them. She looked only at me. I withdrew from the crowd, humiliated and shaken. I remember realizing with a kind of distant horror that I had not once looked away from her. That evening, the storm settled fully over the town. The courthouse windows rattled after sunset. Lightning glowed inside the clouds for long stretches without touching the ground. The AM broadcasts began developing small delays between sentences, as if the announcer had to listen to something before speaking. The barometer, which had held steady through the afternoon, started falling again after dark. By evening, I found myself reorganizing municipal files according to how likely each matter was to lead me back to her. I noticed myself doing it. I did not stop. Dr. Hill, the county physician, told me that several people who had listened to the violin described feeling lighter afterward. That was the word he used. Lighter, he said they used it too, independently, without prompting. At first, what left them was grief, then embarrassment, then certain memories. Long-held habits and old anger faded. Prejudices vanished. So did private loyalties. People around town began to develop a strange, calm emptiness, like patients recovering from severe fever. They were not happy exactly. They were less burdened, less themselves. The diner stayed open later because nobody wanted to go home. Soon after, the advisories changed. Repeated melodies should not be interpreted as instruction. Recognition alone does not constitute authorization. I tried to find out who wrote those notices and when they had first been approved. The records were unclear. One clerk believed the language had existed for years. The original file was missing. By then, she had played publicly for 3 evenings in a row, while wind and lightning ruled the square. It was during that period that I ordered her arrest for causing a public disturbance and obstructing emergency response operations. I also noted, privately, a desire to be near her again. I described this to myself in administrative terms: observation, oversight, authority. When deputies attempted to disperse the crowd before the arrest, several people fought them. Not like rioters, like worshipers defending a shrine. To them, violence had become necessary because silence was unbearable. The violinist did not resist. She allowed the deputies to take her through the square, though many people followed silently behind us in the rain. One man struck his forehead again and again against the telephone pole until his skin split. He whispered the same words each time: "Don't stop my music." Through all of it, the melody continued. At one point, before the deputies took the violin from her, the woman glanced toward the violence and smiled, very slightly. Then she lowered her eyes back to the strings. That was the moment I understood that we were not going to control her. Still, some damaged part of my mind felt satisfied when I saw her locked behind iron bars and concrete, where she could finally be handled by my office. The storm grew worse that night. Wind struck the county jail so hard the walls groaned. The barometer had been dropping for 3 days, but within 2 hours it fell farther than the instrument was made to measure. I stayed at the jail overnight. She lay on the cot in her cell, reading a paperback under a weak yellow light while the storm hammered the building. The room smelled of bleach failing to hide mildew. After a long while, I asked her where she came from. She ignored the question. Instead, she began talking about me. She spoke of private griefs I had never told anyone, old exhaustions, compromises I had made in office, small cowardices. The loneliness that comes with serving a dying town, where people slowly stop seeing you as a man and start seeing you as a function. A signature, a locked door, a voice on a notice. Her voice acted strangely in the concrete room. It did not echo. It seemed to move before the echo and after it at the same time. Rain struck the jail in measured intervals. Without meaning to, my breathing adjusted to her rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The fluorescent light gave a faint change in pitch on every third beat. The desk under my hands vibrated softly. At some point, she stopped speaking about my life and looked at me with open impatience. Only then did I realize she had been asking, again and again, for her cell to be opened and her violin returned. I obeyed. For a brief moment, I felt the shameful certainty that I had been chosen. She stepped out of the cell and looked at me like a disappointed teacher. "You misunderstand the relationship between interruption and protection," she said. I said nothing. "You locked away the only thing presently persuading the storm to pass around you instead of through you." I asked whether she had caused the weather. The question seemed meaningless to her. I stood in the open cell doorway for a length of time I cannot account for. Then I realized I was already holding the violin case. I do not remember deciding to pick it up. I do not remember deciding to walk outside. I only remember being in the storm. By the time we reached the street, the rain had risen to the windowsills in some places. Water moved through Main Street nearly to the knees. It was so cold that my thoughts became simple and slow. Electrical lines hissed where they touched floodwater. The town was almost completely dark except when lightning opened the sky. People came out as she passed. From porches, from storefronts, from parked cars and dark houses. At first, they were only movement in the rain. Then they became figures following her. None of them spoke. They gathered behind her as she climbed the churchyard steps and lifted the violin beneath her chin. Then she played. This melody sounded like mourning. Not sadness exactly, but the formal shape of grief. As the notes moved outward, the rain changed direction around the churchyard. Loose papers lifted and circled us, respecting some invisible boundary. The storm did not stop, but it hesitated. The crowd seemed relieved. Some people swayed gently between measures. For a while, all of us stood there in the center of the storm and felt something like peace. Then lightning struck the cupola weather vane. The flash was so bright that the entire town appeared for one frozen instant, carved in white against the mountains. The iron bent and broke from the roof. Pieces of it tumbled down into the churchyard. The woman inhaled slowly, ready to keep playing. The iron fell through the rain. In one impossible moment, I saw it reach her. I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, she was gone. Not dead, not fallen, simply absent, as if she had never stood on the church steps at all. The scaled leather case leaned against the railing, untouched by rain. Her hat lay in a puddle at the base of the stairs. There was no blood, no body, no mark. The crowd did not leave. Without her, the storm intensified beyond anything ever recorded in county history. Whatever hesitation she had forced upon it ended. Rain came sideways. The calm space over the churchyard collapsed, and the gale rushed through the gathered people like they were made of paper. Several were knocked from their feet. Still, the crowd remained. Some continued counting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The church bell began ringing and did not stop. I ran. I am writing this now from my office in City Hall. The windows bend inward with every gust, and I try not to look at them directly. I have pushed filing cabinets against the ground floor doors. I know this will not help. I did it anyway. The radio has not stopped. Between bursts of static, the AM band counts softly to 3. I have turned it off more than once. It keeps going. The local college frequency, which should be broadcasting emergency updates, now produces only the count. No announcer, no message, just the count. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Outside, people are still gathered in the churchyard. I can see them from this window when I allow myself to look. They are not seeking shelter. They sway in the same rhythm they have followed since she stopped playing, waiting for a downbeat that will never arrive. Some have their faces turned up into the rain. While going through county records, I found the photographs. The county keeps old bound volumes of civic photographs going back to its founding. Floods, elections, market days, public works, street repairs, ribbon cuttings. I was searching for evidence of earlier storms like this one. Instead, I found her. In one photograph, she stood near the old mill during a storm, wearing different clothes but carrying the same case. In another, she stood outside the building that came before Mercer's Hardware, while a crowd gathered in the rain, her violin already raised beneath her chin. A third photograph was water damaged and undated. It showed the valley road during a flood. She stood near the waterline. Several figures around her had faded almost completely from the paper, leaving pale, empty shapes where people had once been. One old report described livestock refusing to enter barns for 3 nights. Another mentioned a storm system that remained stationary over the valley for nearly a week. There were notes about delayed clocks, strange radio pulses, and residents gathering without knowing why. In none of the photographs was anyone looking directly at her. Even when she stood near the center of the crowd, everyone's attention seemed slightly displaced, as if the real event were happening next to the image instead of inside it. In every photograph, she appeared the same age. The paper around her was always strangely well preserved. It is possible I am the only person in this county who ever looked at her and saw a person. It is possible no one ever has. The wind outside is getting stronger. The crowd in the churchyard still has not moved. Dispatch tones arrive in groups of 3. The courthouse bell no longer waits for the hour. Pipes inside City Hall knock softly in triplicate. When the wind drops for a moment, the wiring inside the walls crackles in the same rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. If I press my ear against the wall, I can hear the town counting to itself outside. The sound no longer frightens me the way it should. There are moments now when the silence between the counts feels worse. Story 4. I should never have moved to the Midwest. I know that now, and I know it in a way that sits deep in my bones. It is not the kind of regret you feel after buying the wrong car or taking the wrong job. It is the kind of regret that comes when you realize one decision placed you directly in the path of something old, patient, and hungry. Looking back, I do not even know why I was so sure about leaving Rhode Island. I had a decent life there. I had a job I understood, streets I knew, family close enough to visit without planning it like a vacation. But at the time, all I could think about was getting away. I told myself I wanted space. I told myself I wanted a fresh start. I told myself I was tired of paying too much rent for an apartment with thin walls and no future. Maybe all of that was true. Maybe none of it matters now. When I first told my parents I wanted to leave Rhode Island, they tried hard to talk me out of it. My dad said I was being foolish. He reminded me that good mechanical engineering jobs were not always easy to find, and that I was lucky to have one straight out of college. My mom took a softer approach. She reminded me how much family we had nearby. Aunts, uncles, cousins, old friends. She said they would all miss me, but I could tell what she really meant was that she would miss me. She had that worried look mothers get when they already know their child is going to do something they cannot stop. When they realized I was not going to change my mind, they changed their approach. They stopped telling me not to move and started trying to control where I moved. Go somewhere pretty, my dad said one evening at the kitchen table. Someplace scenic. That way people will actually want to visit you. I don't want you in a big city, my mom said right after him. Those places are dangerous. Too much crime, too many people, too much going on. But when I told them I was moving to Iowa, both of them went silent. It was almost funny at the time. They stared at me like I had just told them I was moving to the moon. My dad was the first one to speak. You'll die of boredom, he said. There's nothing there but fields. My mom nodded, clearly relieved that he had said it first. Really, Eric? Iowa, that sounds like a dead-end state. Couldn't you pick somewhere more interesting? I told him my mind was made up. I had received a job offer from an aerospace company in Iowa, and the pay was almost double what I was making in Rhode Island. On top of that, houses in the Midwest were so much cheaper than anything back home. In Rhode Island, I was stuck renting forever unless I married rich or won the lottery. In Iowa, with my new salary and the money I had saved, I could actually buy a house. A real house. A place with my own driveway, my own yard, and no upstairs neighbors stomping around at midnight. My parents did not like it, but they eventually accepted it. They helped me pack. My mother cried when I left. My father hugged me longer than usual and told me to call if I needed anything. At the time, I thought they were being dramatic. I thought they were scared of change. Now I wish I had listened. Now, when it is far too late. I think an apartment in New York City or a narrow street in San Francisco would have been safer than the open fields of Iowa. Nearly a year after I first told them I was leaving, I found myself settling into my new home. I had been careful with money, and the new job paid well enough that I felt confident buying instead of renting. A lot of people my age had already given up on owning a house, so when the realtor handed me the keys, I felt proud in a way I had never felt before. I had done something real. Something adult. Something permanent. My house was in a brand new development on the edge of a growing city. Everything about the neighborhood looked fresh and unfinished. In fact, it was so new that only 2 houses had been built so far. Mine and another one, 4 lots down, owned by an elderly couple named the Petersons. The rest of the lots were empty squares of dirt and trimmed grass, marked with little flags and survey stakes. The roads were perfectly smooth, with no cracks and no faded lines. The sidewalks were bright new concrete, still clean and pale, without weeds pushing through the seams. There were no old trees along the street, no broken fences, no worn lawns, no history at all. 6 minutes down the road was a new shopping center with a Quick Star, a Taco Bell, and a Walmart. It all felt like someone had dropped a neat little suburban island in the middle of nowhere, because beyond the development and the shopping center were fields, huge fields, fields in every direction. Some of the farmers around the development had refused to sell their land, so the neighborhood sat there half-built, surrounded by open farmland like a small boat floating on a brown and green sea. For someone like me, a city boy who had never spent much real time in the country, the neighborhood felt strange. It was not ugly. In some ways, it was beautiful. The sky was bigger than I was used to. The sunsets were wide and bright. At night, I could see more stars than I had seen in years. But there was something about all that openness that made me uneasy. If I looked too long across the fields, I felt exposed. There were no buildings to block the view, no crowds, no noise, no place to hide. It felt like if I stepped beyond the clean roads and sidewalks, the world would see me from every direction. The house itself was nicer than anything I had ever imagined owning. It was built in that modern farmhouse style people seem to love now, with a black roof, white siding, dark trim, and clean lines. The back of the house had tall floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over my half-acre backyard. Beyond the yard were fields stretching for a mile or two, and far in the distance, near the edge of the horizon, there was a small patch of woods, just a little group of trees, dark and still, separating the land from the sky. The view should have been peaceful. Maybe for someone else it would have been. But whenever I stood too long in front of those windows, an uneasy feeling crept over me. I could not explain it. It was not fear, exactly. Not at first. It was more like the feeling of being watched from far away. A few months after moving in, I noticed the first change. It was a Saturday morning. I was sitting at my dining room table in my favorite bathrobe, drinking fresh coffee and reading a book. The morning was quiet. The house still smelled faintly new, like paint, wood, and clean carpet. The wide back windows filled the room with pale sunlight. I had almost gotten used to the view by then. Almost, as I turned a page, something at the edge of my vision made me pause. I looked up. At first, I did not understand what was wrong. The yard was the same. The fields were the same. The sky was clear. But the patch of woods in the distance looked different. It was bigger, not taller. Wider, the small group of trees that had once sat near the horizon looked like it had nearly doubled in size. It stretched farther to the left and right than I remembered. I set the book down and stared through the glass. Has it always been like that? I muttered to myself. I got up and walked closer to the window, pressing one hand lightly against the glass as I tried to get a better look. My eyes were not tricking me. The woods were larger than I remembered. I stood there for a long time, trying to force the view into something normal. Maybe I had misremembered. Maybe I had never really paid attention. Maybe the morning light was changing the shape of the tree line. Maybe from this angle, with the sun behind me, the trees only looked wider. Forests did not grow overnight. That was obvious. Trees did not just appear. Land did not change like that while people slept. So I decided I had remembered it wrong. I told myself that because I needed to. Then I turned away from the window and went on with my day. I spent the rest of that Saturday reading, cleaning, and playing video games. I avoided looking out the windows for too long. Whenever my eyes drifted toward the glass, I looked away. The day passed quickly, and by evening I was in the kitchen, making dinner. Nothing fancy. Just Kraft mac and cheese, because I was living alone and nobody was there to judge me. As I poured the pasta into the boiling water, I glanced out the back window again. The sun was setting, and the light was low and orange across the fields. The woods looked bigger. This time, it looked like the dark line of trees covered even more of the horizon. I turned the burner down and went to the sliding glass door. I opened it and stepped onto the deck. The evening air smelled like dry grass and soil. I walked to the edge and stared across the fields. "It's the light," I said out loud. "It has to be the light." The sunset had to be casting shadows in a strange way. It had to be making the forest look stretched. My eyes were tired. My mind was making patterns. That was all. I went back inside and finished making dinner, but I barely tasted it. That night, I had a terrible dream. In the dream, I was deep in a forest so thick that I could not see the sky. Every direction looked the same. The trees were packed close together, their trunks black and wet, their branches tangled overhead like fingers. The air was heavy and hard to breathe. It felt like the forest was pressing against my lungs, squeezing each breath out before I could finish taking it. I tried to walk, but the ground shifted under me. Roots caught my feet. Branches scraped my face. Then laughter came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was low and mocking, and it shook the ground beneath me. A dark mist rolled between the trees and swallowed me whole. I woke up sweating. The next morning, I stumbled out of my bedroom and into the living room, still half asleep. Then, I stopped in front of the wall of windows. The entire horizon was forest. I rubbed my eyes. I blinked hard. I looked again. Nothing changed. 2 miles in the distance, where there should have been open farmland, there was now a solid wall of trees. Not a patch, not a thin line. A forest. Thick, dark, and endless from one side of the horizon to the other. I knew I had to talk to someone. The only people close enough to see what I was seeing were the Petersons, the retired farming couple who lived 4 lots down. They were kind people. They waved whenever they saw me, and every couple of weeks, Mrs. Peterson brought me banana bread wrapped in foil. I knew they went to church on Sunday mornings and usually came back around noon, so I sat by the front window and waited for their silver pickup truck to appear. When I saw it rumbling down the empty street, I stood so fast I almost knocked over my coffee. I hurried out the door and walked to their house before they could fully settle in. I rang the doorbell. A moment later, Miss Peterson opened the door. He was a thin man with white hair, a weathered face, and the calm look of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. "Eric," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Hey, Mr. Peterson," I said, already feeling stupid. "Could you help me with something? Would you mind coming down to the driveway for a second?" He looked a little confused, but he nodded and stepped outside. We walked down to the driveway together. "Well," he said, "we're here. What can I help you with?" That was when I realized I had not planned what to say. I had been so eager to ask him that I had not thought about how crazy it would sound. I said, "I was wondering if you noticed the woods in the distance." He looked where I pointed. "I just don't remember them being this big," I continued. "Do you? I thought there was only a small patch of trees out there before, but now the whole horizon is covered. Has it always been like that?" Miss Peterson narrowed his eyes and scanned the distance. For a moment, I felt relief. He was looking. He was checking. He would see it. Then he turned back to me. "Eric," he said slowly, "maybe I'm just missing it, but which woods are you talking about?" I stared at him. "All of it," I said. "The trees. The forest," he looked again, then gave me a careful look that made my stomach twist. "Son, I think you might need to get your eyes checked. As long as we've lived here, there's been nothing out that way but Farmer Marison's field. I don't know where you're getting this forest idea." I stood there in the driveway, staring past him at miles of dark trees surrounding the fields around our neighborhood. The forest was right there. It was impossible to miss. It filled the world. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Peterson inch away from me. "Eric," he said gently, "I hope you're doing well. I'd love to talk more, but I need to help the missus get supper ready. We'll try to stop by later, okay? My voice came out thin. Yeah, sure, Mr. Peterson. He walked back to his house and went inside. I stood there alone for a while, not knowing what to believe. My eyes told me that a forest had grown around us overnight. Mr. Peterson told me there were no trees. I walked back to my house in a daze. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, facing the back windows. The forest stood in the distance like a dark wall. Then, I had an idea. I grabbed my phone and opened Google Earth. I typed in my address and zoomed out to cover the surrounding area. There was nothing. No forest, no woods, no dark line of trees, just fields, roads, and construction lots. I checked older satellite images. 2 years ago, nothing. 5 years ago, nothing. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, nothing but farmland and a few scattered trees. Fear and frustration rose inside me. I jumped up, turned toward the windows, and took a picture. I could show Mr. Peterson. I could show anyone. The camera would prove what I was seeing. But when I looked at the photo, my stomach dropped. The picture showed my living room clearly. It showed the window frames, the floor, the reflection of the couch. But beyond the glass, where the forest should have been, there was only a gray blur. Not fog, not glare. It looked like damaged film, a smeared blank place where the trees refused to appear. I went out onto the deck and took another picture, thinking maybe the window glass had caused the distortion. The second picture was the same. The deck looked normal. The field looked normal. The sky looked normal. But the forest was a gray, twisted smear. Over the next week, the trees moved closer. Each morning, the forest was nearer than it had been the night before. Between Monday and Friday, it crossed the fields and reached the edge of my half-acre property. The open land I had grown used to vanish, replaced by dense, towering woods. My half-built neighborhood no longer looked like a new subdivision in the Midwest. It looked like two lonely houses buried deep in an endless forest. Driving to work became a nightmare. To anyone else, maybe I was still driving down clean new roads between empty lots. To me, I was weaving through thick trees that crowded the asphalt. Branches bent over the road. Leaves brushed my windows. Trunks stood close enough to scrape my mirrors. The trees swayed in the wind, but made no sound. There were no birds singing from the branches, no insects chirping at night, no squirrels, rabbits, deer, or anything alive, moving between the trunks. The forest was green, but dead. Still, it felt aware. It felt like every tree had eyes. I stopped leaving home, except for work. I had already used my sick days, and had started dipping into vacation time. The woods felt hateful, not just strange, hateful, like they knew me and did not want me there. My house became my refuge. I imagined this must have been how early settlers felt inside rough wooden cabins, with the wilderness pressing close outside and darkness waiting beyond the firelight. But the longer it went on, the less safe my house felt. It started to feel like an aquarium, and I was the fish, trapped behind glass while something watched from outside. I got lonely. More than lonely. I was scared of being alone with the trees. So I called my parents and asked them to visit. I even offered to pay for their plane tickets. 2 days later, I watched an Uber drive through the forest toward my house. It followed the street like any normal car would, but to me it looked like the little Honda was weaving between tree trunks. My mom knocked on the door, and when I opened it, she hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. My dad shook my hand, then pulled me into a firm hug. "Well, son," he said, looking around, "you really got in on the ground floor of this place." I nodded. "It's so good to see you," my mom said as she stepped inside, "and to finally see your new house." She walked into the living room and stopped at the wall of windows. "Oh my," she said. "What a wonderful view. You really can see for miles from here." She was staring directly into a wall of trees. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You really can." My parents stayed for the weekend. The whole time they were there, the forest behaved differently. The trees did not move closer. They did not creak. They did not shift. My parents took evening walks around what they thought were new sidewalks in a developing neighborhood. To me, they were walking through thick underbrush under dark branches. One evening, I watched them from the front window as they walked together, arm in arm, through the woods they could not see. Then, I noticed movement. Something in the underbrush was following them. It was low at first, just a dark shape slipping between the trunks. Then, I saw the leaves move. It kept pace with my parents, staying several yards behind them. Panic hit me so hard I could barely breathe. I ran to the front door, threw it open, and shouted from the porch. "Mom, Dad, can you come back? Dinner's ready." Far off among the trees, they turned and looked at me. Then they started walking back. I stood on the porch and watched them the whole way. Whatever was in the brush followed them right up to the edge of the porch. When they climbed the steps, a cold wind rose from the undergrowth and came with them into the house. My mom rubbed her arms and smiled. "Oh," she said, "it's getting a bit chilly out. I begged them to stay longer. I told them I missed them. I told them I could take a few days off work. I told them there was plenty of room. The truth was, I felt safer with them there. But my dad said they had to get back home, and once he decided something, there was no changing his mind. I was ashamed to tell them what was happening. I knew they were not seeing what I was seeing. I was afraid they would worry. Worse, I was afraid they would think I had lost my mind. But I am not crazy. I have touched the bark. I have crushed the leaves in my hands. I broke branches off and burned them in the fire pit. I watched them curl black in the flames. The trees are real. They are alive, but not like normal trees. They are alive in a way that feels wrong. My parents left the next afternoon. As soon as their car disappeared down the road, sounds began to rise from the forest. Hollow, shifting groans echoed through the trees. It sounded like old wooden beams settling in an abandoned house, like the forest was stretching after pretending to sleep all weekend. The creaking continued until sunset. Then, the moment the sun dropped below the trees, everything went impossibly quiet again. That night, I woke up freezing. At first, I thought the heat had gone out. Then I realized I was not in my bed. I was not in my room. I was not even in my house. I was lying on a bed made of leaves, weeds, and soft plants. Above me, towering trees reached into the night sky. Moonlight slipped through the branches, lighting the trunks in a silver glow. They swayed silently. No wind, no rustle, no sound at all. I held my breath. The only thing I could hear was my own heart. I have never been somewhere so quiet and still felt so surrounded. It felt like thousands of eyes were staring at me, like I was standing alone in front of the biggest crowd in the world, and every face in it hated me. Then, far away, I heard one sound, a deep, earthy creak, like a tree bending under heavy wind. Fear shot through me. I sat up and scrambled to my feet. The air felt thick and heavy, almost wet. I turned in a slow circle, trying to understand where I was. Somewhere to my left, I saw a warm glow in the distance. My house. I started walking toward it as fast as I could without running. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Not mine. My own steps made no sound, no matter how hard I walked. But something behind me was moving through the leaves. I stopped. The footsteps stopped, too. My hands began to shake. Then I felt warm, damp breath touch the back of my neck. It smelled like mold, rotten leaves, and old dirt. Terror took over, and I ran. I ran toward the light of my house, branches whipping at my arms and face. Behind me, something charged through the undergrowth. It was loud now, heavy and fast, breaking sticks and tearing through brush. It got closer and closer until I could feel the air move behind me. Then I reached the circle of light spilling from my house. Whatever was chasing me stopped. I did not look back until I had the back door open. When I finally turned, I saw nothing but trees. It was 3:30 in the morning. I did not go back to bed. I locked every door and window in the house. Then I packed a bag. I was done. I did not care about losing the house. I did not care about the job. I did not care about my furniture or my pride or what anyone would think. I had to leave. I sat by the front door with my bag until sunrise. I refused to go outside in the dark again. The sun came up at 6:45. As soon as the first light touched the windows, I got in my car, opened the garage, and backed out. The trees had grown even thicker overnight. I could barely see the street. I had to drive slowly, weaving between trunks that should not have been there. Everywhere I looked, new trees were pushing up from the ground. Saplings burst through the soil, through the grass, even through the asphalt itself. In seconds, they became full-sized trees. One sapling broke through the road directly in front of my car. In the blink of an eye, it thickened into a trunk wider than my hood. I did not have time to brake. The car slammed into it head-on. The airbag exploded into my face, and everything went black. I do not know how long I was unconscious. When I woke, blood was running down my forehead and into my eye. My body ached all over. Broken glass covered my lap. The forest was silent again. I forced myself out of the car and looked around. The road was gone. The path I had driven had already been swallowed by fresh trees. The trunks had shifted, closing behind me. There was nowhere to go except back. I started walking toward where I thought my house was. Every step hurt. My knee felt wrong, and I had to limp. I had not driven far, maybe half a mile at most, but in that place distance did not feel normal. As I walked, I heard little popping sounds behind me. New plants rising, new roots breaking through the ground. If I stood still too long, weeds curled around my ankles and tried to hold me. I wandered for what felt like hours before I found my house. Its white walls were covered in vines and moss. Branches leaned over the roof. Roots had cracked the driveway. It looked less like a new house now and more like something the forest had found and started digesting. I stumbled inside and locked the door. That is where I am now. I am hiding in the bathroom, writing this as fast as I can. The house is moaning around me. The walls are bending under the weight of vines, branches, and roots. Windows are cracking. Some have already shattered. I can hear branches pushing through the living room glass, scraping across the floor. The whole house is being squeezed like a snake squeezing prey. There are roots under the floorboards now. I can hear them moving. I do not think the house will hold much longer.